and Jonathan Rakoff. Hanya leads our work in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. Jonathan leads our policy work, but we're also joined by fantastic colleagues who work on Hedera's marketing team. I just asked if they raise their hands. Christian and Oliver, who are over there in the back. We have Vignesh, who leads our work in the Middle East, who's walking in right now. And take time, meet the folks on the team. They're all here to support you all. That's what we're here to do in the Hedera ecosystem. As part of my role, I've been with Hedera since 2019. I come from a background of Oracle, working on emerging technologies, but a lot of times the work that we do and the work that I've done is in public benefit spaces, which is how we started the Sustainable Impact Fund. It's how we think about sustainability, is how we enable folks. So the way that we do that in the HBAR Foundation is through funding. We're oftentimes funding digital public goods and working with folks on the Hedera Governing Council, a group of Fortune 500s across industries and geographies, as well as blue chip companies and organizations within their industries. We're constantly looking to not just bring folks on board, but bring folks who are looking to drive change in their organizations and drive change in the world. And oftentimes the Sustainable Impact Fund is working with these organizations on decarbonizing supply chains, looking at how we enable more renewable energy capacity, how we think about investing in credible carbon projects, biodiversity projects, nature projects. And we're doing that through not just digital infrastructure, but digital infrastructure that achieves a specific set of goals that we've set out. And those 5 goals are kind of the basis of how we not just invest, but how much of our ecosystem thinks about climate change and the climate crisis. And some solutions, not at a technical level. Oftentimes we hear Web3 folks talking about technology, but these are different areas of focus that we think can help change how people talk about climate. We want to make climate finance auditable. We want to know where funding comes from and where it goes to. We use public ledgers to do that. But there's many other pieces of the puzzle that go beyond technology. We're going to hear more about that today and what opening the books on climate finance means. What it means to understand every role and actor in the context of not just finance, but also the projects that finance flows to, the communities that it impacts. I think community is a key word that we need to think about because we have a community here at COP, but we also have every community in the world that the negotiation that's happening today affects. And oftentimes those communities don't necessarily fully understand everything that's happening here in Dubai, things that happened last year in Sharm, years before that, and years after this one. As we think about that though, all these processes that are governed, they flow into methodologies oftentimes. Scientific methodologies for carbon accounting, carbon offset creation, biodiversity assets. And our goal is to have not just the largest library of digitized and open source methodologies in the world, but to build a system of knowledge that iterates and improves over time. So today, that's where we are. We've built a library that started with one and has grown to dozens and dozens of methodologies. We made an announcement earlier this week in collaboration with Envision, Swirlds Labs, and great support from the Secretariat of the UNFCCC, where their staff graciously worked with us and donated their time to make sure that these methodologies were correct. Of course, these methodologies, when they're used in projects, they have to have independent audits. We try to scale validation and verification. We're very interested, as both a fund and the Hedera ecosystem, is enabling auditors to exist, validation and verification bodies to exist in the global south. Carbon projects, emissions tracking doesn't exist without independent auditing. And of course, all this data that's going to come out of finance, it's going to come out of the methodologies, data being stored both on a public ledger but processed through a public ledger, independent verification of that data, going even beyond environmental attributes. It forms into attributes that create price, and that price needs to go all the way back to the source data. We're focused on this in the fund. We've invested in open source infrastructure there, and we've spent a lot of time of thinking about when assets sit on company balance sheets, whether they're carbon emissions, offsets, biodiversity assets, water rights, that it's reported credibly. We know the assets are real following methodologies that have data that comes from a specific source that's scientifically based. And so as part of that, we've based our infrastructure investments trying to find ways to build applications that aren't just built overnight or focused on a unit of account like a token, but based on the methodologies derived from data. And we try to make it easy to build those methodologies in under 2 weeks digitally. We have a lot of folks in the room who are focused on that. I know Timeless is here. I know other folks in the ecosystem like Tollum are focusing on interpreting that data. They're here focused on price. And I'd encourage you to talk to these folks throughout the day in addition to listening to them on the panels. We're going to have some lightning talks after each panel where we're going to go through some of these applications in 10 minutes or so you can actually see what folks are talking about here to complement the panels. Of course, in our ecosystem, as we implement our 5 goals and support that through infrastructure that allows companies to build faster, that allows people to build applications and businesses that talk to other businesses, or applications that those businesses have talking to other applications or consumers. And those consumers are the catalysts who are making real world change. They could be companies decarbonizing their emissions, project developers working with communities, and those communities are driving change that lead to outcomes in the form of their projects. So at the lowest layer, we have Hedera as the basis of trust. It's not easy to understand how a public ledger is relevant in climate, in the sense that you can't say, I'm going to just use this public ledger by itself. But it is easy to understand that we need trust in climate, and we need trust in data, and we need trust in the actors that we work with. How we use Hedera, oftentimes, is to understand the workflows, the decentralized workflows that already naturally exist in the world and are organized by open source tools like The Guardian that our fund helps enable to be used by anyone. And we have great partners like DLT Earth who are studying this, studying the 5 goals that I just walked through. We've actually just also announced a series of open source methodology funding, a hackathon for $100,000 that anyone can enter and participate in to create methodologies, further the academic process of improvement. And we have fantastic enablers and supporting parties like Swirls Labs who are working with their community. And I'd encourage you to meet Serge and Serge's team. Serge is here in the back with his hand raised, to talk about that methodology hackathon, how you can participate building methodologies to further the process. And those methodologies often underpin and support applications that folks can use in the real world, climate projects, emissions tracking projects, even building out ESG reporting frameworks. That's all possible. And of course, the users of those frameworks could be other applications. We have a cook stove project that we visited in Bouaké with the team at Alcott. The Alcott team could raise their hand. And I know Mercedes is here in the back and can tell you a lot more about that. But the idea is they have an application that helps work on climate finance in the community that's talking to other applications like Alcott.io is building. And of course, that leads to projects all across our ecosystem. We have folks like ServiceNow who are building applications around renewable energy certificates on Hedera. They're already live and working. We have folks who've taken that in a hackathon format and built a methodology in 2 weeks for gold standards TPDD tech methodology, focused on more automated cook stove reporting. We've done that for metered and measured as well. This was the metered and measured one, where they've gone and digitized it step by step by step, where we know every role and actor and data that they produced, but we can trace it all the way back to the source. Now, one thing I want to point out, one of the key goals of the fund is focusing on a concept called financial equity. And I think this is really important because this is something that impacts every community, especially in the global south. We need to think oftentimes when we hear about climate, it's often talking about environmental data, but we need to think about the social impact and who is actually owning, who is benefiting from these projects. When we use tools like a public ledger, we have the ability not just to attest data out of accounts, but also receive value into those accounts. And oftentimes, especially in the carbon credit market, we think about people advertising saying a certain percentage of funds is going back to the community, but it's oftentimes hard to prove. The concept of financial equity, where you understand when a forward is sold, a spot credit is sold, the aggregate value of the not just credits, but the entire series of companies involved receiving value is able to be calculated. If we're able to understand the aggregate amount that was made on that project and we can trace the funds remitted back to registries, verifiers, project developers, but also the community, that's something that we've been spending a lot of time on as part of our investment thesis, working with our community. And being able to prove those funds in stablecoins on public ledgers back to the same accounts that are testing value and data means we can prove to the accounts of the community, and even where those community funds are remitted to, exactly what has happened on a public ledger in a way that couldn't be done before. And of course, companies will buy that. Companies will buy into assets where they're easier to be proven from a data perspective for environmental credibility, but also social credibility. Where are my dollars going as a corporate? And we have folks who are doing that with carbon emissions tokens, where they're looking to not just account for their footprint, know every single supply chain item, where it came from, how it was produced, not just for a digital birth certificate of provenance of metals or mining, but also from a decarbonization perspective. when someone creates an emission, by creating assets and goods that they sell, they can decarbonize. And if we can take those two concepts and bring them together, we're starting to do things with public ledgers that previously weren't possible. And so out of today, we're going to talk about a lot of these concepts in a lot more detail. I went through them here pretty quickly, but I want folks to think about some of the outcomes that they can achieve. And if you find that partner in here, they can help you participate in these goals and these outcomes. That's something that we're looking to help facilitate today in the conversation. And with that, I just want to say a big thank you to the Hub Culture staff for helping put this event on. And I want to jump into our first panel. And I'll ask Masamba and Mbaye maybe to come up to start digitization within the Paris Agreement as our first set of discussions. And I'll welcome them to the floor. So, yeah. So I don't know if I need to do an introduction here, but I feel like I may ask you to introduce yourselves a little bit more. But I'm really, really happy to have both Masamba Tuoye and Mbaye Diagne here today. The work that's being done in the context of the Paris Agreement is really important. And oftentimes in the solutions that we're building in regenerative finance or refi, we are trying to disrupt and build enabling technologies for the outcomes that we want to see. But oftentimes the assets that we're creating are being thought about in the corporate setting, offsetting like we just talked about in emissions. And so as part of the process, both Mbaye works in methodologies as well as innovation, balancing those two areas. And Mbaye works in as the vice chair of the Article 6.4 committee. And I'd love for you to share a little bit about your work as part of your introduction, but maybe also addressing the crowd in thinking about data and digital solutions, and maybe the opportunity of the Paris Agreement. So.
Thank you, Wes, and good morning to all of you. Very pleased to be here and to have this opportunity to interact with you all. My name is Masamba Tuoye. I'm the project executive of the UN Climate Change Global Innovation Hub, an initiative launched by the UNFCCC Secretariat at COP26. So we have now 2 years. The Global Innovation Hub was launched with a one-fold vision, which is to mobilize innovation to serve the many people and the planet. As you all know, science is value neutral, but innovation has always an agenda. Unfortunately, it has not yet sufficiently served the many people and the planet. It has rather served power, economic power and military power. We want now innovation to serve more the many people and the planet. So we have a twofold mission articulated around two elements. First, how the hub can contribute in accelerating and upscaling existing solution. When I'm saying solution, it's not just about technology solution. It's also about innovative policy instrument, innovative financial instrument, innovative cooperative approach, innovative business model, and innovative product from the culture and creative industry. So the second component of the mission is the acceleration of the development of the missing solution. The first, we upscale existing solution. The second, we develop the missing one. And then we have a threefold core value that are articulated around three key principles: caring, sharing, and daring. Caring because we consider that for innovation to support climate and sustainability, it has to genuinely care about the needs and the well-being of the many people and the planet. Sharing because innovation require climate and sustainability innovation require radical collaboration. And this is why we are supporting sharing of knowledge, open source, tools that are also shared, sharing of experience, and also a mindset of solution provider. It's not about solving my problem as a country, as a city, as a corporate, but more about how can I contribute in developing a solution that others can also use. And finally, the daring part, which is extremely critical for innovation to happen. Most of the time when we are setting climate and sustainability goals, we tend to set them based on our understanding of what is possible, not what is needed. And this is the problem, because this is precisely the gap between what is needed and what is possible, which is the main driver for innovation. Otherwise, we are locked in a vicious circle where those that are setting goal and target will say, we cannot be ambitious because we do not have the solution. And those that are developing the solution will not develop transformative solution because there is no demand. So we need to have a moonshot way of thinking that can break this vicious circle so that innovation can be fully supporting the climate and sustainability. Now, digital technology has a fundamental role to play in climate and sustainability innovation. The green transition can only be a twin digital and green transition. This is because the most transformative type of climate and sustainability action are enabled by digital technology. If you want to disrupt a product that has high negative externality and replace this product with an alternative that is aligned with the climate and sustainability goal, most of the time it's only possible if you leverage digital technology. If you want to increase the efficiency of use of a product, think about car sharing or carpooling. Most of the time it is enabled by digital technology. If you want to enhance the circularity of the economy, think about using blockchain, for example, to track the history of product. It is facilitated, enabled by digital technology. So these three types of climate and sustainability action are among the most transformative, and most of the time they require digital technology. This is why it is playing a very important role. But digital technology also play a very important role for policy making, climate and sustainability policy making. At the Global Innovation Hub, we are developing a digital platform that we want to be the space where the right solution that will help address the demand, the global demand for climate and sustainability solution will be, let's say, inspire and develop. What we are trying to do is to have a kind of innovation roadmap. As you all know, this year we are discussing the global stocktake. What we expect is that what will get out of the global stocktake will be translated into a concrete demand for climate and sustainability solution. Now, you will need to have an instrument to respond to that demand. We want this digital platform to be part of the instrument that will be required to respond to that demand. So we'll have there a database of demand for climate and sustainability solution, because we are promoting demand-driven innovation, not product-to-push innovation. You develop your product and then you look for use case. That's not the right approach when it comes to climate and sustainability solution. We want the development of solution to be driven by concrete needs in terms of climate and sustainability solution. So we want to have on this digital platform an AI tool, and we are collaborating with some publisher. What we want to do is to have the AI tool digesting all the scientific knowledge that is out there, and then being able to define three things. What are the technologies that exist already that we need to deploy by combining them with the right policy instrument, the right financial instrument, the right business model, and so and so? What are the technologies that are missing, but for which we have the underlying science? So we use applied science for the development of this missing technology. And where do we have missing science? There we will engage with the research centers to develop new science. So development of new science, apply science to develop missing technology, and deployment of existing technology. This is what we are trying to do in this platform, and different digital instruments will be absolutely needed to help us. Finally, just to insist on one aspect that is related to climate policy making, this is the digitization end-to-end of the activity cycle. This is absolutely needed, and this is why we are collaborating with Hedera on that aspect, because this is what enables countries with low capability to access carbon finance, to be part of this process. Under the CDM, we did great things, but the two most important criticism against the CDM were, first, too complex. Second, regional distribution of project. Countries with low capability did not benefit from the CDM. By using digitized technology and automatizing the activity cycle from end to end, you actually take the complexity of the system and you put it at the site of the regulatory body, and the user of the system will not see the complexity. And this is exactly what needs to be done. Less complexity, cost effectiveness, and also reduction of the time of verification, validation, operation of the activity cycle. These are three key elements that digital technology will bring to the activity cycle. So thank you again for the invitation, and looking forward to our future collaboration.
And I just want to thank again, Masamba, you, the team, for all the support and the digitization of the methodologies. It's a very, very important area that we really believe in as well. And we very much also believe that about the financial flow back to the community is equally important to enable the sustainable development to scale for the Global South and ensure credibility for the rest of the world and assets that they do invest in. But I want to turn to Mbaye maybe to do an introduction and talk also a little more in detail about how some of these concepts that we're working on with Masamba even apply in the 6.4 setting, and maybe share a little about the negotiation that's currently ongoing and how that may apply.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, guys. And good morning, all. And it's my pleasure to be here today and interact with you. I'm Aladji Mbaye Diagne. I am the director of a small consultancy firm in Senegal, supporting small enterprises to originate carbon projects. But most important, I'm the lead coordinator for Africa when it comes to negotiation under the UNFCCC in a carbon market. And I spend a lot of my time for that, for free for them, to support African countries in this negotiation. And I follow the carbon market under the CDM as well as under the Paris Agreement. And I'm the representative of the African region under the CDM in the executive board, but I'm also the vice chair of the 6.4 supervisory body representing Africa. And here, we are here in Dubai to operationalize the Article 6. We want, that's the objective of all negotiators, we want the Article 6 mechanisms be operational next year. Maybe at the end of next year, but during next year. Because as you know, we adopted Article 6, which is part of the Paris Agreement in 2015 in Paris. And all the rules to operationalize the Paris Rule Book was adopted in 2018 in Katowice. But not Article 6. It was the only article that was not adopted in 2018 because we had very tough discussions. And it's only in Glasgow in 2021 that we adopted the rules, the principles, only the principles for Article 6. And now we want to operationalize those rules. What we need just to recall on Article 6, we have international cooperation that is allowed under the Article 6 to support countries to meet their commitments, their NDC, through this international cooperation. We are not talking in the Paris Agreement about market, carbon market, and all of that. We are talking about international cooperation involving the transfer of mitigation outcome, meaning the transfer of emission reduction from one country to another one. And that is done through Article 6.2. That's the only mechanism, principle, that allow the transfer of emission reduction from a country to another one to meet the receiving country's NDC. And also talking about the international transfer of mitigation outcome for other international purposes, meaning the ICAO, the aviation, or the international maritime aviation, and so on. All international transactions to meet international commitments are guided by the guidance we have under the Article 6.2. And in that Article 6.2, you may use mitigation outcome generated by the UNFCCC mechanism, but you may use any other units coming from any standard that may come from gold standard, from Vera, from bilateral agreement, anywhere. But the only thing is that when you do that transaction, there are some guiding principle you have to follow. And at the heart of this guiding principle is the transparency. First. Second, avoiding double counting, because the same unit can't be accounted for two commitments. And also the environmental integrity of the units to ensure that it's something real and measure. And all of that will be made in a very transparent manner. All of that will be made public. Everyone will see what happens between Senegal and Switzerland, how they generate the project, how they account the project and monitor them, how they validate all those projects, how the transaction is done, how we avoid the double counting between both countries, and ensure the environmental integrity. That is the aim of Article 6.2. And to do so, we have set up very robust tracking and reporting and tracking systems. When you do so, you need to have a registry. You need to have the identification of the units you are transacting, and you have also to report in a regular manner. You provide an initial report, you provide an annual report, and you provide a biennial report. And all the elements of those reports are negotiated, and we have very clear elements that each participating party has to report. And the participating party will have each of them their report, but at the international level, we will have under the UNFCCC an international registry. Every country has its own registry and report electronically, and the UNFCCC will have an international registry. And we call it the centralized accounting and reporting platform, where you have an international registry, you have a database that will be made public to allow everyone to know what's going on. And for that, we are having currently very tough discussions, because here in in Dubai, we are operationalizing those principles, and many proposals was made. And we have some technical paper that are on the table that we needed to adopt to make them operational. And just to highlight also one important element is many changes have happened, because to develop all those principles and operationalize them, we are not just negotiating among parties' representatives. We always have a call for input for the external world, the practitioners on the ground, people that have technologies, have solutions, that have some things to propose, and all the other stakeholders, scientists, all of them. And all inputs are taken into account to develop this. Because the main objective of the Article 6 is to increase the ambition in mitigation and adaptation. Because we consider that by allowing this international cooperation among countries, we will allow other stakeholders, private sector, NGOs, local governments, to participate while they haven't taken commitments. And also to support very vulnerable communities. And this, as I said, this centralized accounting and reporting platform will need digital technology to ensure the credibility and the robustness of all, and the transparency of all of that. But the negotiations are tough. I need to recognize that, and we need to find a compromise solution, because under the UNFCCC, the principle is a consensus. And it's why it's tough to get very quickly solutions. Because some countries don't want, for example, to link their carbon market registry to the international one. They say they fear some problems in relation to that, or they don't want to disclose some information and all of that. So we are discussing the level of interoperability between the different registries to allow transparency, but also to be sure of the integrity of the different transactions that are at the heart of our negotiation. But as I said, the Article 6.2 is about that cooperation between countries to meet their NDC through a transfer of emission reductions. But as I said, the emission reductions are generated by underlying mechanisms. And among those underlying mechanisms, you have a UNFCCC mechanism, which is the 6.4 mechanism. This one is a mechanism generating emission reduction, certify emission reduction as the CDM. And those emission reduction generated under the UNFCCC may be used under 6.2 to be transferred, as well as other units, gold standard units, Vera units, bilateral cooperation units between Japan and someone else, between Switzerland and someone else. But all those units need to, to follow and meet very robust principles and guidance. And under this UNFCCC mechanism, as said by Masamba, we also have defined some principles built on what we have seen and the assessment of the UNFCCC mechanism, the CDM1. As said by Masamba, one of the main criticisms was the complexity. We wanted this new one to be less complex. We also want this mechanism being very robust. We want also a very broad participation. And this mechanism is activity agnostic. We are talking about all types of activities that can generate these credible units. We are talking about all sectors. We are talking about all removals, nature-based removals, technology-based removals, all types of removals are included in that mechanism. Bearing in mind that those units generated under that mechanism need to follow a very robust activity cycle, verification, validation, and also having very robust methodology. And as said by Masamba and West, we can build on the digitization to simplify those mechanisms and allow for broader participation, because some small companies, some small entities that wanted to participate face some issue in developing the project design documents and following all the activity cycle. By having this digitization, we aim to facilitate all of that. And now in the negotiation, the main issue we are facing during this first week, but now we will go to the second week at a very higher level, at the ministerial level, are related to have a common nomenclature of all elements. Because if you want to digitize, you need to have the same understanding of all elements. Some people don't want to have a mandatory common nomenclature. Some don't want that. We are also discussing how annually party will report under what we call an agreed electronic format report annually, already identify all elements to be reported and how that will be reported to allow for aggregating all of them. We are still discussing those elements. We are discussing the sequencing of the different activities, meaning we propose first you submit what we call an initial report. If Senegal and Switzerland wanted to cooperate and use the units to meet their NDC, they have to submit a report explaining that cooperation, what methodologies they use, how those methodologies are validated, how the projects are validated, all the process, how they avoid double counting, how robust is that cooperation before they participate. And that initial report undergo a review by an expert Article 6 review team with recommendation to identify the inconsistencies in that cooperation and how you address those inconsistencies. And you can't continue your cooperation if you haven't addressed those inconsistencies in relation to the guidance provided under the UNFCCC. And after you address them, you are able to do the transaction and you report based on that transaction. And your report will also undergo a review to ensure the materiality and all of that, and also the same system will continue before you will be able to use the units transacted to meet your NDC, nationally determined contribution. But some people also don't want that robust system to follow all of that. And also, as I said, we also are discussing the interoperability between the registry to ensure that there is no double counting. And under the 6.4, which is the UNFCCC mechanism, we are mainly discussing two main recommendations that will make the system operational next year. It's one recommendation in relation to the requirement for developing and assessing methodology, how to develop methodology, what principle you need to follow, how to ensure all the principle, broad participation, avoiding double, many principles, how you follow that. And second, we are discussing how to address activities involving removals, nature-based removals and technology-based removals that have specific requirement in addition to the general requirement for methodologies. That are the main discussion. And in addition to all of that, we have also issued a procedure for appels and grievance, which is very important. We didn't have it under the CDM. It's a new one. And we need to go through that to allow people to have grievance. Then they are not happy with the decision taken under the UNFCCC. And lastly, and most important, is the Sustainable Development Tool. We are developing a very robust Sustainable Development Tool based on the existing ones. And that, the use of that Sustainable Development Tool will be a mandatory. And after you apply it, it will be verified. You have to monitor different elements, and that will follow verification. I will stop here, and happy to answer any question and interact with you. Thank you.
So maybe just a couple questions, and we can open it up to the audience in a few minutes. But one of the things you mentioned, Mbaye, was standards. Oftentimes in our ecosystem, we think of standards. I know Masamba, we've been working together on how we can even combine some of those standards together to get to new outcomes. And we have some folks here in the audience who even govern technical standards and maybe thinking about how we can bring them to the methodology level standards. So we have Sandra and Paul here from the GBBC who have started a sustainability business working group that thinks about the technical standards, not just in methodologies for emissions reductions, but also emissions in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And they actually just released a digital measurement reporting and verification specification and standards with over 197 different areas that can be considered properties. And that ultimately makes some of these elements of the data, the elements of what is reported, able to be consumed. So I'd love to hear your perspective on how these digital tools can be created. Maybe what's the roadmap of these digital tools from the perspective of both innovation as well as adoption for clarity for the countries to easily create projects? And what is the opportunity for us going forward in making it easy for a smaller project developer in the global south to engage, but understanding how to engage based on those standards and technical tools that can enable them?
For the methodologies, as you said, we had that criticism from the small project developers. The methodologies are very complex. When you want to submit your project, you have to follow different type of format of project development, design development, and one developed under the CDM, another one under gold standard and Vera, and all of that. It's very difficult. And you always need to have an expert, a consultant. You have to pay to undergo this one. And after that, you'll follow all the requirements in terms of monitoring, very complex also. That refrain the broad participation and the regional distribution. It's why you'll see that the most vulnerable people that have the opportunity to develop projects that will participate and contribute to the global emission reduction, but as well as meeting their sustainable development goals. Those people are not involved. And at the end of the day, they just develop their project without the carbon market component. Having this possibility of digitization, as said by Masamba, you will transfer all that complexity at the regulatory board. And they have just to provide some information, because even in the previous system, they provide those information. But in addition to that, they need to have someone that will translate that into what is needed to ensure the robustness of the project. Here, they will just, in a form, provide those information, and the system itself transform those information in the data we are needed to ensure that we meet the methodologies. It's what we are pushing for. Under the CDM, there were some parties, some representative under the UNFCCC CDM executive board, because I'm part of that, that didn't want to make resource to do so. But that lead to have only less than 7% of the CDM project being developed in Africa and some other regions. By doing so, we think we will have a broader participation as well as a better regional distribution. And we expect that under the 6.4 mechanism, which is a mechanism under the UNFCCC, we will be able to use that digital technology to facilitate the participation in that mechanism. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe just to say some word about the deployment. I think if you want the digitized methodology to be broadly used, and if you want to accelerate the process, we need to start under 6.2, because this is where it is, let's say, easier. And if we have some countries that are willing to adopt this digitized methodology under their scheme, and at the same time use the traditional approach, everybody will be learning from that. And I think if we see that the system can be trusted, because what you have as outcome when you are using digitized methodology is identical with, in terms of environmental integrity, with what you have in the usual way, with the only difference that by using digitized methodology, you are more cost effective and you save a lot of time. This will, I think, facilitate to have trust of the 6.4 supervisory body, because then people can say we have tested this methodology, this digitized methodology, they work, and maybe it will prompt the 6.4 supervisory body to request the Secretariat to do more work in that direction.
Thank you very much. And I really appreciate you sharing your perspective in how we enable using digital technologies, but also standards to make it easier, make the market more accessible. In the context of opportunities for partnership, we have a lot of groups here in the room looking to engage in 6.2 and 6.4 as it's adopted and scaled? And maybe my last question before we open up to the audience is, how do you suggest that the private sector, that the nonprofits of the world engage using this technology? How do they take those steps forward to innovate as we think about both Article 6 and even not just 6.2 or 6.4, but even in the non-market mechanisms world? How do they engage and bring that, bring solutions to the table that drive innovation, but also outcomes that can be examples for the market?
Thank you, and thank you for addressing also the 6.8. It's a non-market-based approach that will facilitate the linkage between technology and finance, mitigation, and with adaptation, co-benefits, and all of that. Here also, we have made some progress, and we have already, under the UNFCCC, what we called a non-market-based, web-based platform. It's already in place, where all providers of technologies, finance, of capacity building, or whatever, can post their possibility to participate in non-market-based approaches, meaning all what you are doing will not lead to a international transfer of mitigation outcome, but will support the countries, developing countries, to meet their NDC in terms of mitigation, adaptation, technology transfer, and finance. You can post all of that in that web base. At the same time, country will post their need. And here also we will need technology, because we want to do a matchmaking between the needs and the services that are provided. We have started just now. The web base is designed. We hope to have it operational by the first quarter of next year. But as you said, for the methodology, for developing methodologies, everyone can make submission to the 6.4. Whether you are party, whether you already have your project, you are project developer, or you are just a scientist or a practitioner, you are thinking about this green hydrogen technology that can generate this one, and you can submit it and propose how the methodology is developed, how the monitoring will be done. And that can be a way also, in addition to what was said by Masamba, for every one of us to make proposals. And that proposals, if they meet the requirement to develop methodology, will be accepted. And your methodology will be a 6.4 methodology. Thank you.
And is it fair to say that's a good plug for the hackathon, for methodologies, to use that hackathon to develop methodologies to submit?
And just to add, yes, and just highlight also on the 6.2, we have seen already some initiative. For example, you have with the World Bank and Singapore, you have this cat trust trying to have a meta-based registry, trying to have all information coming everywhere, and it's through a blockchain they wanted to explore. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe just to add that the approach moving forward could be somehow what you have done. I think we have a broad range of methodology. Under the CDM, there was more than 250 methodology. So maybe the first step is to prioritize what are the methodologies that we will need to digitize urgently, and maybe focus on those that have more sustainable development impact, those that are more needed by countries with low capabilities, maybe start digitizing this methodology and facilitating for project developer to generate in an automated manner PDD under 6.4 or for countries to use it under 6.2 and use this to have in parallel the use of the automated system and the normal system, at least for some time, and create trust. I think it could be a good way forward for the private sector to engage if they have prioritized this methodology and then start working on digitizing them and submitting both projects generated in an automated manner and projects that have been developed, let's say, using the usual approach.
Because, just to add something, because if we adopt the recommendation made by the 6.4 supervisory body on the requirement for developing and assessing methodology, the next step will be to generate methodologies. And that will be done through two ways. The first one, seeing, as said by Basamba, the most used methodology under the CDM to refine them to meet those requirements. And that will be through a call to the secretary will work, but also anyone can make proposals to refine those methodology to align them with the adopted rules. But also anyone, as I said before, may submit new methodology in addition to that work. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think we can open up for maybe one or two questions from the audience. I see multiple, so I'm gonna maybe go right to left. And I'll start with Jörg. If you can introduce yourself and as part of your question.
Thank you. My name is Jörg Füssler from Infras in Zurich. We are working in carbon markets, and we are also running the Climate Ledger initiative, and it's great to see you, Mbaye and Masamba here. I would also like to congratulate for your ventures into digitalization. I think it's really a big step, having such a huge institution embracing this. This is always quite a hard thing to do, so I think that's very important. My question would be about transparency. You said it is a difficult thing to get it through because there are always actors who think it's better to have less transparency. In my personal view, the current crisis also in the voluntary market has to do to a large part also with the lack of data. We use very outdated data sometimes in the methodology. So we need better data, better access to data. In your view, how do we get better data to be also translated in the digital systems? How do we raise confidence? And maybe a bit more a particular question, it's also a question about data safety and security, right? People don't like to share data which then later could be used against them, things like that. So what's your take on how to motivate project participants, standards, and so on, to share more data to make this market better? Thank you.
Very tough question. And we face all those issues in developing countries. But that may be addressed in the methodologies, because in the new rules, we want simplification. We want, but we want, as you said, transparency, and we want the most updated data to ensure that what we are doing will help all the system. But we need also to take into account that, and that will oblige people to use the most recent data. The crediting period of the different projects will be less than they were in the CDM. And also the different revisions from the one crediting period to the others will be needed in the updates of some data. All of that have been addressed, but as you said, that will be need in the second hand at a country level, domestically, at the national level, that the system is built in a way to allow for that. But we need also to recognize that the role of the host country where the project is developed is increased in this Article 6 than under the CDM. And they will be more involved, the DNA will be more involved in the crediting period, in the baseline, in the additionality issue and all of that. And you will need, in relation to its NDC, to provide a number of information, because we will link the NDC and all what will happen within the market. And we think by that way, at the host country, they will be in a situation to get more update data, because they need to report every 2 years also in their NDC. And that can generate at a country level a situation to provide more information that can be used also in relation to the market. That are some ideas, but we need to think deeply around that.
Maybe just to add that here, we can have, let's say, two issues that we want to address. We want to enhance the quality of data, but we do not want also to exclude countries that have low capability and are not able to provide the quality of data that is required. It's why I think while we are working on empowering countries so that they can generate high-level quality data, we need in the requirement of the methodology to have alternative to address this problem. So for example, if the quality of data is low, you can participate, but we put in place requirement that enable to ensure environmental integrity, but still you can participate.
Okay, so I'm told we have about one more question and 1 more minute. So we are going to do maybe a very quick question and a very quick answer in order to protect our lunchtime. So I'm going to pass it over here, and if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, Marcelo Labre from Viridius AI. So, it was very insightful what you address, and that address is actually a screaming question I've been hearing on the past few days there in the Blue Zone, which is how do we get existing VCM credits eligible to 6.2? And like going a little beyond of the two questions that Wes asked in the beginning, in practical terms, would you say that if I were to advise a project developer who has a Vera or Gold Standard project today, how to prepare the project for that eligibility, would that be the case that they should, for example, digitize the project under Hedera ecosystem, for example? Would that be, for example, a necessary condition for that eligibility to happen? Or are there other aspects around it that would provide that type of eligibility?
I think that having a digitized project will not be a condition to participate. All units or certified emission reduction generated by any standard may participate in 6.2. Whether they came from Vera, they came from Gold Standard, or a bilateral agreement like JCM with the Japanese, Switzerland, or whatever. But the only condition is to meet the requirement and the guidance under 6.2 in terms of environmental integrity, in terms of transparency, and so on. And I've seen that those independent standards, they call themselves, because in the past they are called voluntary standard, but now they call themselves voluntary standard because they want to participate in 6.2. And 6.2 is about using the units to meet other countries' NDC or other international purposes. So they are aligning their rules to meet the 6.2. Gold Standard is doing so. and already Vera has published a labeling way to meet the 6.2. They are working on that, and all project developers that are under Vera will follow that rules that will be soon developed by Vera and all the independent standards in relation to the requirement for developing methodology we will adopt here in Dubai. Thank you.
One sentence. The digitization of methodology or the use of digitized activity cycle is facilitative. It's not a requirement. So it helps you reduce your transaction costs and maybe accelerate the preparation of the project design document, but it's not a regulatory requirement. You do it if you want.
And if a standard very early develop all of that, maybe PPs will go through this standard instead of having burden in others. Thank you.
Well, I want to ask everyone to give a big round of applause and a thank you to our panelists, Samba and Bayer. Thank you very much. Thank you. So just a couple logistics. We are going to go right into our next panel. If you are going to get a coffee, water, bio break, please do so. But I want to welcome to the stage a great set of panelists for a panel that's going to be on opening the books of climate finance. This panel is a really exciting area for us. We have a lot of great representatives, and it's going to be moderated by Christina Lecresier-Corner from Cointelegraph, who's agreed graciously to moderate this for us and walk us through not just how you can use public ledgers in this space, but thinking about climate finance in a way that serves the market, serves developing countries. And I'd like to welcome all the panelists and Christina to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wes. Raphael, Stephanie, Jonathan, Alexei, please join me on stage. So yes, as Wes said already, I'm representing Cointelegraph, that is the oldest and the biggest publication dedicated to cryptocurrencies, blockchain, and AI. I think that there is actually a very big gap in knowledge and distribution of information on sustainable initiatives within the Web3 space and outside of the space. And this is why I think it's extremely important that we have these conversations. Yes, Raphael, run, just jump into the stage. Thanks. So I'm really happy and honored to be here and to moderate this important talk, both from the technology perspective, but even more importantly from the social and reputation perspective, in my opinion. Auditability is something that can remove skepticism, in my opinion. This is something that is fundamentally important. So we'll be talking about what are the current challenges and what are the solutions, and what are the ways to make sure that we also promote it fairly and in a convincing manner. So I'm not a fan of intro questions because usually it takes like half of the panel. So if we can delve into the discussion already with introducing yourselves and how exactly you and your projects contribute to covering this gap in transparency, accountability, auditability of the environmental solutions markets, and how do you see your role and your company's role in this important venture? Let's start maybe from the right side, Stephanie.
Sure. Kind of starting at the end, I guess, and we'll hear from others that we work with closely in a minute, but I'm from Carbon Growth Partners. We're a dedicated investment manager in international carbon markets. So we've been investing in the voluntary carbon market, although we would call it the verified carbon market, also in Article 6 markets, and in compliance convergence markets. And I guess why that's relevant and our perspectives is around, I guess, digital enablement. And so the role that technology can provide in the decision making for investors when they're thinking about whether they will invest in a project or support a project developer, and I think at the moment we actually have all of the data that we need to some of the questions that were asked before, but it's not in a form that is readily transparent, that's comparable, that's interoperable, that's harmonised across different platforms. And as an investor, that can pose a challenge to us when we're trying to compare different projects that we might invest in, if we're looking at the quality of those projects, if we're trying to compare, you know, what buyers' perspectives will be of that ultimately if we're selling those. So we really see ourselves sitting in that gap between often early stage funding that might come from philanthropy or government grants, and, you know, in 6.2 and 6.4 markets where you might have a government buyer, and technology and digitisation and being able to really prove the quality of a project and its impacts is incredibly important to unlocking finance. So I might just leave it there, and we'll hear from others, and we're working with Alcott and others in some of the projects that we've developed. But really it's about how do you start to unlock decision making and really enable good decision making when we're thinking about it from an investment perspective.
Thank you very much. Let's move forward.
So my name is Jonathan Rakoff. I actually work with Wes Geisenberger at the HBAR Foundation, Sustainable Impact Fund. I lead law and policy, and you know, candidly, I'm subbing in here to provide support with after a cancellation. I think we mostly want to hear from the projects working in this space. But our goal, as Wes said earlier, not to repeat him, is to through our investments to catalyze action on the part of organizations at every point along the life cycle of a carbon asset to promote transparency. The topic is auditability, and we'll get into details about what that means. But the notion is not to look for transparency for its own sake, but rather to innovate in a way that will bring credibility and trust to these markets on the notion that those deficits in credibility and trust is what has prevented the climate asset markets from scaling. And of course, we have a large climate finance gap that we need to close. And so, you know, our perspective from the foundation is catalytic investments, and I'll turn it to Raphael.
Thank you very much, and I think that you shouldn't underestimate actually your role in these discussions, because it's very important to have not only like project perspectives, but actually the holistic view, and this is what a HBR Foundation is given. Raphael.
Thank you. My name is
Raphael
Dery, and so I'm running Alcott.io, which is the digital arm of the project developer Alcott, which was established in like 2009 following the Kyoto Protocol. And thanks to the support and understanding of the HBAR Foundation, we are able to translate the digital world to the carbon world in order to facilitate the origination of the project, following principles that are accepted as being the right direction for making sure that we can bring like more efficiency for the project development, but also like more integrity and transparency on the origination and the monitoring of the project.
Thank you very much. Alexei.
Hi everyone. So I'm Alexei. I'm CEO and co-founder of EverCity, and our mission is to increase access to the climate finance for developing countries, and we do that by streamlining the project management related to origination of carbon credits and other climate finance instruments. So for us, auditability and transparency is key, since we are dealing with consecutive stages of the origination process, and at every stage of this process we're using Hedera blockchain to ensure transparency and traceability throughout the whole value chain.
Thank you very much, Alexei. Can I maybe ask the next question to you from the point of view of the person who has been working with data for so long? So what are the biggest challenges and barriers that you see in enabling this transparency and auditability? And where do you see the biggest gap? Is it more about the environmental data? Is it more about the financial data? Is it something else?
Yeah, so currently up till now, those origination processes, they're made mainly using manual standard digital tools like Excel spreadsheets and Word documents. So that's kind of quite outdated practices, and a lot is done still by hand. So that creates a problem that, first of all, if you're a new person to carbon markets, you actually struggle to understand all the nitty-gritty of these processes, and you don't have the knowledge. So that's a barrier to entry for the new players. And at the same time, this is a barrier for the project developers to increase their efficiency, because their capacity is quite limited, and they cannot process more projects, and that's the current situation. So digital tools, not necessarily blockchain, but automation, AI, and other tools, they actually increase efficiency of those processes, so that project developers can do more projects, and so that new projects can come into the market, and the knowledge somehow is equalized. So you don't have to learn a lot about carbon markets, and technology can actually help you access those markets with ease, and that's great. But if we're talking about like blockchain and technological issues out there, I guess this is pretty much related to the fact that blockchain is still a new technology and has to become more user-friendly still, and there is an issue of interoperability. But all in all, I think we are at the point where we see the adoption of the technology, and it's still early years, but we see the growing utilization of blockchain, not only in startups, but also in the UN, in the international institutions, on the national level. So these are quite exciting times, and I think everyone already saw the benefits of blockchain technology for enabling transparency.
You mentioned user experience. I think it's actually very important, and for me it connects with what Stephanie has said about the trust from both the investors and the project's perspective, because sometimes without the trust, and trust is being built also by the user experience, we can not actually enable the adequate use of the standards and methodologies that are already in place. So, Stephanie, my question to you is, where do you see the biggest gap now? Do you think that this is related to distribution of information, to education, or to the tech side itself, to the methodology, standards, and infrastructure, or it's more sort of a social aspect, social problem, and having some actors that do not want to be accountable for something?
It's probably a little bit of everything, I would say. So I think one of the challenges, particularly if we look at the voluntary carbon market over the last 2 years, has been really a sentiment and perception problem. Not to say that there haven't been legitimate issues around some projects and methodologies, but I think one of the real opportunities now is to use data and technology to bring confidence back into the market at all levels, so that developers can feel and local communities can feel comfortable that they understand how they're participating in the market, that there is genuine benefit sharing, that there's greater transparency around the ways that you can do that. For project developers, that they have a greater understanding about what their opportunities are in terms of price or the markets that they can sell into. For buyers to have the confidence in the quality of the carbon credits or units. I'm using carbon credits to capture everything in the market really, but in those carbon credits and about the traceability of those. And so I think the biggest opportunity is around that confidence that can come from transparency, and using the same data and information across different platforms and for different purposes, so that everyone is kind of working from the same information. And I think at the moment, part of the reason that we started the business that I'm in and the business that we have exists is because it is a very opaque market. And so having expertise, many of us have come out of the Nature Conservancy, have a conservation and community development background. That has given us the ability to engage with project partners to ensure that local communities are genuinely engaged. We can, delve into and look for the data that we need and gain the information that we need. But if we're going to scale the market, if it's going to be successful, not everyone is going to be able to do that. And so I think data and technology, the ability to audit and trace impacts, to have that transparency, allows people to come to the market and understand that more readily. So I think that's the real opportunity. How do we take the data that we have, using that across multiple platforms, also democratizing the process, but making sure there's standardization there around quality in the information that we use. So I think it's kind of everything that you mentioned, and that's the opportunity, is how you bring those together and use technology to improve that, as well as the infrastructure we already have.
How realistic it is actually to go from opaque to clear. And I imagine that we are not expecting here 100% of, we want it, but we know that it's not maybe that realistic. So how much of a transparency is needed in order to make sure that the margin of error and the general trust in the market is actually as high as possible? So question to everyone, but whoever wants to, maybe Raphael, you as an exemplary representative of the...
From a project developer point of view, we are like technology agnostic. We're not going to start, we do have a digital department now that is helping to translate a complicated world to another complicated world in order to bring solutions that can be effective on the ground. What we're looking at with the opening the books approach is to bring like a wealth of data that can be relevant to many different stakeholders, whether it is the investor side, whether it is the regulatory side, whether it is the operational side. There is an incentive on the structure of like developing a project design document that is limiting the amount of information that you put in this document, because you will be accountable for it. But like there are like many data around that can add a lot of value to many different organs. And we want to have the capability to have this information accessible somewhere so that it can be relevant to some actors. So for instance, talking with different people, let's say in the case of like the tuba composting plant for Article 6.2, I was talking to some people in insurance, and they were telling me that like if we're able to like value the metrics of waste that we're able to divert, it can have a correlation with the reduction of malaria that can help to reduce the sovereign loans that the country receives. And this is an information I had no idea about, but I need to be able to like make them access this information so that they can use it in some ways. And then like for the community, we want them to have access to a transparent origination price so that the benefit sharing mechanism can be clearly defined to them. We have at the moment a little bit of like a clog on the information, because a project developer would say we redistribute a certain percentage back to the community, but we need to understand from which part of the ecosystem it's distributed. Is it the final price? Is it the origination price? And so we want to have a possibility to being fully transparent on that. We have like from the demand side, many requests to disclose like origination price, and they come with scrutiny that is like extreme, is quite accurate in terms of like making sure that like there is no loophole on their side, but it's something that we want to be able through technology to scale like drastically so that it can become like a regular process in the system.
I might just add also, I think there's a difference between transparency and everything being available publicly and complete open data. And so I think, as I think about transparency, it's about the people who need to have that information, at a minimum, having the information so that they can make really informed decisions. So to Raf's point around price transparency and origination versus a sales price, if you have benefit sharing with a community, they are entitled to and should understand how the economics work, because that has a direct impact on them. Do you need to share all of the commercially sensitive information that's involved in that transaction with everybody publicly on a public platform? perhaps not, but you do need to make sure that there is defensible data that is available to the decision makers. And then there's also information that does need to be made publicly available and open. And I think there will be a separation in the two of those. I don't think we'll get to a point where every piece of data and every piece of information is publicly available for everyone to be able to interrogate, but there are key pieces of information that do need to be made available, and then key pieces of information that need to be made available to particular people within that process. But I think you're going to jump in there, Ralph, as well.
No, very interesting advice. Jonathan, your perspective.
So just to build on that, I think that's a critical point. We would not want every bit of information that might be available to be made available, because that would drown the listener in such a flood of data that would at best tune them out. And so, it's important to think of transparency as a solution to, as has been mentioned, a perceptual problem. And that perceptual problem doesn't operate like a scientific judgment. It isn't that there is insufficient transparent data to conclude with a greater than 95% likelihood that a certain project will in fact deliver its environmental benefit. It happens at a much higher altitude. I'm a lawyer, and prior to working with the foundation, I would represent major corporates and others as they worked through their decisions about whether or not to purchase offsets of these of the sort that folks in this room are attempting to raise the quality of. And when they said no, when they sat on the sidelines, they did so because there was a vague judgment, an instinct that this was not a high quality market, right? In many respects, I think the challenge is not to prove that particular projects are, in fact, they have high environmental integrity or financial equity is strong, because that's, I think, not so complicated to do. The challenge is to help folks understand what's possible, right? So the opportunity, and this may be disciplinary bias, but the opportunity that comes from the recently passed VCM DA, the AB 1305 in California, the Voluntary Carbon Market Disclosure Act, the first, to my knowledge, the first disclosure regulation focused specifically on the voluntary markets will now drive companies to search for and disclose the proof behind the representations they make about the offsets they buy. And the hope is that when the large majority of those turn out, in fact, to be high-quality projects, whatever level of data you provide to demonstrate it, then the set point will change, right? People will look not for evidence that the whole market is high quality, but rather they'll be alert to circumstances where particular projects might be low quality, right? You want to shift the burden of demonstrating quality towards what we see in many other domains. You look for the bad apples. You don't assume that the entire bucket of apples is bad to start.
I just want to add a point that we need to make the data accessible, but there is still selective disclosure that needs to be in place, especially in the context of technical-based solution where there can be information that are confidential and can be actually relevant to competitors in order to structure their different offers. But this is still things that technology can address very well, and then can after that be relevant between the different parties in order to enable this transparency.
Let's delve a little bit more into this commitments and into this educational efforts. So which commitments and by whom need to take place in order to enable transparency as a fundamental value of the environmental market, and how we can achieve it. So and what are the steps, I guess, for these commitments to get done?
Well, maybe so. Just in the context of the voluntary carbon market, and as the example I gave before, you have an incentive to disclose the minimum. So it's a voluntary approach to disclose the maximum. In the context of compliance, you also follow a regulatory path. So I believe that in terms of commitment, it's just strategic shift about understanding that there is a definite interest from many different parties to have access to this information, and to make sure that like you can bridge structured data that is bringing value, and also help to identify some of the issues. Because it's not suddenly because we open the books that like everything is going to be like perfect. And what we need is like guidance from external bodies that can help, for instance, on data governance, and identify some of the different mechanisms that are not maybe yet identified, in order to have like clear guidelines about like the way and the direction to go, so that we can be like always in an evolutive process.
What are these minimum commitments, and are they different between, should they be different between different actors, state actors, private actors, et cetera, et cetera?
I don't know that there's a concrete answer to that, right? I think on some level, the degree of commitment appropriate to each class of actor will flow from the infrastructure in place, and the infrastructure that we can put in place to make, because we don't want to impose a series of commitments that for organizations that are feasibility constrained, right? Because then it looks as though they're failing instantly, right? And so through some of the work that we're doing at the foundation, through our investee partners, the tools are being developed to make disclosure more fluid, more to de-risk it, to make it less costly. You know, what you find in, not necessarily perhaps what you'd intended, but in many corporate environments, in my experience, there's a desire to disclose. The inhibition is first what was mentioned. You don't disclose more in a compliance environment than you have to, because anything above that line creates risk. But many companies would be willing to undertake that extra increment of risk if they simply had the infrastructure tools in place. And so, you know, we're working to address those shortfalls on multiple different points in the life cycle. But, you know, ultimately, you know, the market, through its interaction with regulators, will decide what the optimum level of disclosure will be. So I don't think there's a fixed answer, but it is the answer that results in a sort of a willingness to comply and an absence of enforcement. You know? Kind of a vague answer, but inevitably.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with that, and state that, you know, these commitments could definitely come from the regulation, and they should. But I think that there is a growing momentum in disclosing this data, and there is a, you know, demand and the best market practice, and that's where the market is shifting, and that's great, because the society raises these questions and requests for better transparency within the carbon markets, and also investors. So, you know, the education is there, and investors of takers are way more educated than, like, you know, 10 years ago. And the you know, request for disclosure comes also from this side. But as with the other markets, you know, we need the voice of everyone and participation of everyone to make the market better.
It's probably also worth noting that our thresholds will change over time. You know, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, the expectations might have been very minimal. We may have a sense of what they are now, but it's not hard to look into the future and see, from a carbon accounting perspective, as an example, right now it's sufficient to use spend-based estimates, but, you know, there's an increasing demand. I think we're going to hear from you know, folks later in the day. You know, actual primary data for emissions levels is now increasingly important, and we can imagine that's only going to sort of progress further and further with standards rising, resolution deepening, and you know, that's something we should prepare for.
Can I just jump in? I was going to say, I think particularly in the last 2 years in the voluntary carbon market and also in Article 6 markets, the focus has been on governance and the commitments that sit around that. So I think we actually have a very strong pool of kind of standards and approaches that really stipulate what commitments should look like and what good commitments look like. So earlier in the week, many of the So SBTI, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, VCMI, ICVCM, the alphabet soup that everyone's now familiar with, came out together and said, this is what an end-to-end integrity framework looks like. Now, obviously that's all at a principles level rather than a implementation level. But I do think as a market, we've now recognise that it's important to have consistency around the expectations of those commitments and the governance around those. And so the next step is around the implementation of those. And so I think from a commitments perspective, what I would like to see, and certainly what we're committing to as an organisation, is to take the governance evolution that has taken place in response to questions around integrity in the market or questions around the way that the market operates, and commit to using those and taking a really pragmatic approach to implementing them, because they provide really good guidance. They provide good guidance around what a project needs to demonstrate, what a company needs to demonstrate, what good net zero practice and commitments look like. There are codes of practice around how you engage with Indigenous communities and local people. They're not perfect, but I think there's been a huge amount of work put into that, and now we need to focus on using those frameworks and using data and technology and all of the tools we have available to really implement those and then evolve them over time.
This has been super interesting and super curious for me, because from my media perspective, I expected maybe a little bit more the answer that requires this media exposure. In my opinion, if anyone needs to commit, first it needs to be big state actors and big companies that everyone knows. I mean, from the investment perspective, obviously, a startup cannot get an investment in this field unless everything is transparent. But the overall mainstream trust will not get better because of this startups' commitments. While, in my opinion, at least from the media perspective, big giants who do not need any more investments, but who shape our vision of how the world is moving and how important are the sustainability issues. And big state actors, and I'm not talking about global south, actually big state actors. In my opinion, this is the most important.
I totally agree, and I think that was why at the beginning I was saying, I think there's a lot of discussion about the data that we need. Data is absolute. I'm in no way denying that we need to have good quality data. But I think to your point, we have the data that we need, and I think we have the governance frameworks in place now that it should be about those commitments. And so how do you see that demand coming back in and strong commitments from state actors and from large companies who have been, taking a bit of a wait and see approach, and particularly on the company side, to say, okay, yes, there have been challenges in the market. We have addressed those, or at least put frameworks in place. So now to bring the demand side back in. I think that's actually going to be what's really important in the next, to the end of this year and the first 6 months of next year.
What other solutions and promotion activities, in your opinion, are important to make sure that we do not only establish this within the market, but also we shape the public perception of the sustainability issues? I mean, we are all here for sustainability and against climate change, and this is pretty clear, but if you go outside, I mean, I'm coming from the crypto industry, and 99% of crypto people are skeptical about sustainability, but not only in crypto. I mean, I've talked to some businesses here in Dubai, and what is sustainability? They say, well, it doesn't exist as a... So this is to provoke you to tell me how the auditability and traceability and transparency can actually be used to fight the skepticism in the mainstream audience.
It's quite simple. We need to build success case. We need to build something that is demonstrable and that has an impact on the ground and on the environment. I use a very good metric for that. I have an audit body that are my kids, 10 and 12 years old. If I'm not able to explain to them what I'm doing, then I reformulate what I'm expressing.
Very wise.
And so it's something that we have to channel through all the different bodies that are involved. We have to talk to the investors, we have to talk to the regulatory side, we have to talk to the infrastructure side, and we have at the end to talk to the people that are at the front of the project, which are the community. So it's also like a common engagement that they have. The first place in the car, and that also technology and amount of data can help them to identify the areas where they can improve the project by themselves. So that for instance, a wealth of data coming from, let's say, Earth observation can help them to identify zones where they could prioritize action that can have a better impact. So we need to be able to deliver this information to a greater audience. So also we are able to demonstrate the benefits of the carbon markets, which is an instrument that is a climate finance vehicle, so that we get away a little bit from this situation where we have difficulty to demonstrate the additionality that we try to bring through these projects.
The euphemistic way you formulated this. Exactly. Other thoughts? Jonathan?
Just one additional thing. I think the challenge is, the communication challenge is also a grassroots climate communications challenge, because when you think about what the source of demand is for the assets, it's it will be driven by the desire of companies to do good, the desire to comply with the rules that are now coming into force, but it'll be mostly driven by the demand that the company's customers and employees and stakeholders have for action. And it's not just the crypto community. I think there's a fair bit of data now that segment by segment, demographic by demographic, people are starting to be concerned about climate and sustainability. But when you add in any burden, any potential friction, then suddenly their engagement in the issues drop. And there's a fair bit of data now that shows that the way to increase engagement is not just through fear, demonstration of the disastrous consequences. The latest IPCC report about all the negative outcomes that are occurring and will occur, but rather by creating for people a positive vision for what life and lifestyles can be in a sustainable way. And in the context of climate assets, that means a positive vision for what climate projects can do, not just for carbon emissions avoidance and reduction and removal, but also for all of the associated co-benefits. You want enthusiasm at the grassroots for these projects. When you have that, then we'll be off to the races. The concern will only be avoidance of big scandal.
I absolutely agree with the communications component. And I think one of the things that is often missed from the market is that the beneficiaries of the carbon market aren't companies. The beneficiaries of the carbon market are the people who are developing those projects. It's Indigenous communities and local people. If we think about where most of our carbon resources and assets are, they're in the global south. And that gets missed from the conversation. And it's certainly been missed in a lot of the mainstream media and criticisms of the market of the last 2 years, when there's a focus on who's using those credits and not what happens when if we didn't have the carbon market, if you think about the disastrous impacts of that beyond our inability to keep to a safe level of global warming, it's also a mechanism that exists now to start to channel finance to those who are going to be most negatively impacted by climate change, but also have the ability to benefit from the way that market works. And I feel like that just gets missed all of the time. It's one of my real frustrations, but I think there's an opportunity there.
Thank you for mentioning that, Alexa.
Yeah, so I definitely agree, and I think communication and knowledge barrier is definitely something we need to bring down in order to increase access to climate finance in the global south and address the core human needs of the communities in developing countries. And that's where technology is key to bringing down this knowledge barrier. And it's now being possible, to use the technology so that these communities, these people can access climate financing without, learning about all the acronyms that were mentioned today, and just expressing their needs and receiving the support they need to address those needs and to improve their livelihoods. So it's definitely, the most exciting use case for the technology, that we can now establish a communication bridge between financiers in the global north that, were educated during their whole lives to use the climate finance and all these, financial processes and so on, and the people on the ground who have their challenges and who are striving to find the solutions. So the technology being put in the middle acts as an ultimate, translator and the way to exchange knowledge and resources between those two groups, and that's I think absolutely amazing. And also technology here helps to spread out the knowledge about the great use cases and projects that sometimes in the same country communities do not understand what is being done and what can be shared and scaled to improve people's lives. So I think that is definitely the main topic, and that's the main impact of technologies that we're all trying to achieve here.
Totally agree. I would love also to add one tech aspect that fascinates me a lot, and this relates to what has been said about the fact that not every piece of data needs to be public, needs to be transparent, but there is the zero knowledge proof, so meaning that with blockchain you actually can disclose the data without disclosing who is owning the data, and this is, in my opinion, fundamental for the whole agenda that we are building here. Because data is fundamental. I would love to open the floor for questions. We have a few minutes. Don't be shy, raise your hands. We covered it all. Okay, then okay, please. Can we get a mic there? Please introduce yourself and...
Hello? Okay. So I'm Claudia, I'm the COO of Moss Earth from Brazil. And my question will be more on regards of the investor perspective in terms of what's being regulated and what's being discussed here at COP. But what are you guys seeing for this next year or so in terms of funding and opportunities in this? We have been discussing, we have been building things similarly to have what Olcott and anticipating, but the idea is just to understand the perspective of future in that. We have been discussing biodiversity, nature-based solutions, blockchain, and all of that. But what are you seeing in the perspective of an investment?
Maybe Stephanie? Jonathan, can you share the mic? Thanks.
Is that on? I gave my microphone away. I thought it would go to someone else. Been dominating the conversation. I think there's a few key things that we would like to see, which will be fundamentally important for the way that the market evolves. So one of those is the demand side. So ultimately, the driver of the carbon market is who is going to buy and use those carbon credits. And we've seen in the last 2 years, the lack of confidence or questions around the market has seen a reduction in the number of retirements, but also there's been a lot more money that has gone into the infrastructure of the carbon market, so into data and technology and platforms, than has been going into the projects that are actually delivering carbon benefits. I think that will start to flip. I think the changes in methodologies, things like the Integrity Council on the voluntary carbon market, I'll try not to use the acronyms for people, and the core carbon principles will start to create a lot more integrity and transparency around what that looks like. So providing a way for companies and countries to really start to delve into the carbon market. We're also starting to see a lot more national carbon markets come into play. That will also start to drive investment because it provides the certainty and clarity around the way that carbon credits can be used and by whom and for what purpose. I think earlier in the week we also had the announcement from the CFTC really important guidance there. And there's also all of the financial regulators who are coming in around the need for there to be consistency in the way that carbon credits and carbon assets are treated like other financial assets. And that really starts to mainstream the opportunity for investors. So we're a relatively small investor. You know, we manage a couple of $100 million, which is not insignificant. But if you think about the trillions of dollars that are needed to finance climate ambition and that are sitting in mainstream institutional investors and mainstream financial institutions, they're the sorts of things that are needed in that to bring the confidence for them to start to invest. And we're seeing a lot of that happen and very deliberately. So I think probably there's still a period of time and kind of more on that journey, but they're the markers I'd be looking for, particularly over the next 12 months. I don't know if anyone else has a...
Anyone else wants to add something?
So I think, you know, I'll just make 2 points. One, you know, the digital infrastructure that we're working with our partners to build and scale is not applicable only to the voluntary markets. And so I imagine that, as I'm sure most know, the carbon compliance markets are vastly bigger at this time. And, you know, there's no reason why the same advantages can't be applied to them. The entry points are more complex, but I think we'll be seeing efforts to direct these same efficiency drivers to the compliance markets. And point two, you know, as we see regulatory mandates begin finally to proliferate, not as fast maybe as some of us expected or hoped, but it is happening. CFTC, California, CBAM in Europe. And I think now the challenge will be to, from a funding perspective, to help support those organizations developing innovative solutions for compliance. You know, it's not necessarily easy to comply with as someone who used to write environmental rules, best efforts, it's still almost impenetrable and hard to comply with. So I think later today there'll be a making ESG reporting credible panel, and, you know, perhaps they'll go into details about you know, how investments can accomplish that goal.
So if I may, I think it's a great question actually to conclude. I work a lot with investors, but from the media perspective, I think, and this can relate, in my opinion, to everything that we've talked today, this is incredibly important to build a narrative that would be relatable to everyone, because it's sometimes very simple to get into, I know, tech side and this is the best solution and this is the best way to proceed, but why? I mean, the mainstream community appeals to something that relates to them personally. The killer apps are still the ones that get the most investments as well, because they are relatable. So I invite everyone to be relatable in what we're doing here, because we actually want to create a positive impact, and this is really something that that needs to be admired fully. So I thank very much my co-panelists and Wes and Hedera for organizing this, and invite everyone to lunch.
So just one little bit of housekeeping before lunch. We're going to have a series of lightning talks throughout the day. They're going to be 10 minutes long, focusing on some of the concepts that we're talking about throughout our panels. So during lunch, if you want to learn a little bit more about, say, the UNFCCC methodologies that were digitized, that were discussed on stage, you want to learn about how we're scaling validation and verification and what some of the new carbon market registries are working on, like GCR, and other different projects that are happening in our ecosystem, including the opening the books concept, those talks are going to be over there. They're going to be 10 minutes long at a time. We're going to start with a demonstration of what was done in the digitization in partnership with Envision, Swirlds Labs, and enabled by the Secretariat staff of the UNFCCC, which is so helpful. And we're going to start over there in about 2-3 minutes. But for everyone else, we're going to do lunch, and we're going to start now. We'll call everyone back in about 45 minutes or so to continue with our next panel. Thank you all. I appreciate it. And thank you very much to the panelists. There was only 3 buttons, and I just had to pick which one.
Can we get a group photo, you guys, real quickly?